Welcome to Nutrition with Elena. We are off to a bumpy start, but here we go. Elena, I'll turn it over to you.
Try again. Great. So we're going to talk about resetting and restoring our routines. I find that this time of year is really good for that. Just feel like summer gets a little hectic and we're not on schedule sometimes and maybe traveling or whatever, but I feel like fall is a nice opportunity to kind of ground ourselves, get outside more. Cooking, I feel like, we're not worried about like heating up our kitchens and making our house hot. Maybe it feels a little warmer in here today, but in general, it's a little cooler. We might be wanting to make more soups and stews and more batch cooking and things like that. So we're going to talk about all of that today. But first, we're going to get started with a couple of recipes because they are both going to take a little bit longer to cook. Um, so I'm starting with pumpkin bars, and these are really fun, nice fall flavors. So we're going to get started with the crust first. So for the crust, I'm doing a cup of almond flour. All right, wait, sure. I did buy another container. We'll see if I need it. It looks like I didn't need it. Finish that one up. So we're going to do a cup of almond flour. And you're going to want to find almond flour that's just almonds. So sometimes it's mixed with other kind of like baking flours. But for this, and for a lot of things, you just want straight almond flour. Now I'm going to do 2 tablespoons of almond butter. And if you have an almond allergy, you could always, adjust this. So you could use like um, oat flour, so blended up oats, and maybe like 2 tablespoons of tahini or peanut butter if you're not allergic to that, or even some type of other fat like some people might use a little bit of oil. So we're going to do 2 tablespoons of almond butter. Oops. I'm just putting this all in my food processor. And then we're going to mix in our dates. So I pre-soaked the dates with some hot water, just because these dates are really pretty hard. You could also do like even leave them overnight in water in the fridge, but I actually did boiling water so that it would just go a little faster. Make sure they're pitted. I made that mistake before. I can't remember if it was on one of these classes, but Nina's laughing, so maybe it was. And I just ended up with a bunch. Now it wasn't here. I ended up with a bunch of pits in whatever I was making. So that wasn't super fun. Great. And then we're going to do a half teaspoon of vanilla extract. Great. And I'm not sure that I'm spotlighted anymore. Are you guys seeing me spotlighted? Okay, just because on my end,
You are. You're good.
that is good. All right. Now I'm just gonna mute so that you don't have to hear this going. Great. So it made my dough for me. I'm going to take my container and I'm going to press it into the bottom. I've been using this kind of smaller dish. I do think you might get away with like an 8 by 8. Um, but I have been kind of demoing it in this, just the smaller glass dish that I have. If you find it's not quite enough for an 8 by 8, you could always make the batter like maybe do it 1.5 times the recipe for it. So I'm gonna just press this down. And you could bake this first. I didn't, and it seemed to still come out okay with just kind of layering the pumpkin filling on top. But if you want it to be like a little bit of a crispier layer and then the pumpkin on top, you can bake this for maybe like 10 to 15 minutes. Also, in the interest of time, I'd rather just not waste extra time with doing that. So I have the bottom crust just pressed down. And the cool thing about almond flour, you're getting a little protein in this crust, which is nice. Not a ton, but you're gonna have a little bit in there, which makes like a serving of this have 7 grams of protein, which for a more dessert type of a thing, it's not a bad amount. All right, so now we're going to work on this filling. So for the filling, we're using some, I have, we're gonna do the pureed pumpkin with the dates first in here, and then we'll mix the eggs and mix everything else together then. Finding my can opener. I have the oven preheating to 350 for that. So we're going to put a 1/2 cup of just the pumpkin filling. Now with this, obviously there's a lot more left, right? I'm taking out a 1/2 cup. So what I like to do is actually freeze this. So you can actually freeze it in ice cube trays and then pop it out into a bag or just in like whatever containers or other bags, just in whatever portion you'd like to make. So if you like to use this for smoothies, you could do like smoothie portions frozen. Some people give it to their dog. If you have a dog, a lot of dogs seem to like the canned pumpkin and it serves some purposes for them, I guess, for their stomach and whatever. I'm not sure, but my dog, I was convinced he was just having stomach problems this morning until I went outside and found that he brought up some sort of a hand towel. I thought we were past that phase, but apparently not. So maybe he needs a little canned pumpkin today. All right, so we're going to do a 1/2 cup of pureed pumpkin here. And then I'm going to add those dates again. So we're using 5 dates for the filling. And you'll notice we're not adding any sweetener to this recipe, giving this recipe enough. And then if we need a little more liquid, which I don't think we will, but this date water, this leftover soaked date water has a nice sweetness to it. All right, so I'm gonna mute again so you don't have to hear this going off. All right. And my dates don't, oh, and here's the little guy over here trying to lick my pumpkin. I don't know if you guys can see him. He's not little, actually. Pretty big. So my dates, they didn't fully break up, but that's okay. It's nice. It still tastes good when you're eating it and after it's baked. So we're gonna start adding this to another bowl. First, I'm going to whisk my egg just so that's already whisked and broken down. So we're going to do one egg. And thank you to whoever noticed that that was missing from my recipe. Definitely helps hold it together. You could also do a flax egg if you prefer to not have eggs. And that's, again, I think we've talked about that before, but it's 3 tablespoons of flaxseed, ground flaxseed. I'm sorry, 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed to 3 tablespoons of water. And then you just mix it and let it sit till it kind of gels up, usually about 5 minutes. Great. So we have our egg here. We're going to add our pumpkin mixture. Some of the date brands are a little bit softer. Like there's one called like I think Marucci that you can get at the store or something to that effect. Um, and those are nice and soft. So they would break down. The ones that I've been using, I still am kind of using this big bag that I got from BJ's, and they're really dry and hard. So they take a lot of soaking to break them down properly. And I didn't give them quite enough time, but that's okay. It'll still taste yummy. I'm going to mix that. And then we're also going to add in some milk. So 2 tablespoons of milk. You could also use date sugar if you'd rather have it already kind of broken down. And that's a nice option as well. I'll probably use about maybe 3 tablespoons of that, 2 to 3 tablespoons. All right, and we're going to do 2 tablespoons of milk. I am using unsweetened soy milk. You could use whatever kind of milk you have on hand. I would also like to highlight that these bars have about 5 grams of fiber in them. So they're a really nice source of fiber. They're not going to be the kind of dessert that spike and crash your blood sugar. It's going to be very stable with this. We have some healthy fats, some proteins, and a good amount of fiber. Then we're doing a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. And then about a 1/2 teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice. All right, then I'm just going to put this on top. Just keep it on top. Then we're going to let this bake. It's like a custard at 360. And we'll know it's done when our, toothpick or whatever comes out clean. It won't jiggle around anymore. Let me go pop this in. Okay. So I set that for 35 minutes. We might, be done by the time it's actually done, but we can kind of get, you can get an idea of what it looks like. All right, so now we're going to make our chickpea noodle soup. And I'm sure, we've all had chicken noodle soup. And this is just a spin on it and, using chickpeas instead of the chicken and veggie broth instead of the chicken broth. And it's tasty and also a good source of, let me get that open real quick. So we're going to also notice that it's a good source of fiber at about 9.5 grams per serving. Also, the sodium is going to be low because we are using low sodium chickpeas and a low sodium vegetable broth. Great. So we're going to start with I'm going to first start with getting this pan heated because this takes some time to get itself heated up. All right, and then we're going to do 2 large carrots. I'm going to chop these up. All right, so we'll just chop up a carrot for making heard of the word mirepoix. So it's like the word for kind of like that base of a soup where you're using the onions, the carrot, and the celery. You're doing more kind of like Latin cuisine, we call it sofrito, and that's usually onions, peppers, and garlic. So, most cultures kind of have a similar base of vegetables that they use to flavor their dishes. For our carrot. Let's get some oil in here, see if it's getting started with heating. So we're going to just do a tablespoon of olive oil. Don't need a little time. We're going to do 2 large ribs of celery. I always feel like soups and things are such a nice, easy way to add beans into our diet. So I know we always talk about the benefits of beans for the fiber. And it's just a really nice way to boost that in a way that feels manageable for a lot of people. Between chilies and different soups, stews, we can really have a variety in our diets. And then we're just going to do half of a medium onion. We go. Put our carrots in there. They tend to take a couple more minutes than the other ones. Let's do our onion. And we'll do celery and our it's enough to make my eyes water. All right. While that's sauteing, I'm just gonna get everything else ready and then we can kind of talk about, get into our slides. I just want to get the chickpeas ready. And I know we talk about with the beans, I did choose a low sodium chickpea. I'm going to rinse and drain it. And then I am going to be using a whole wheat thin pasta. You could also use um, all sorts of other things, right? We could use barley as our starch. We could use quinoa. If you're needing a little less fiber for different GI types of reasons, you can try maybe just even just like on an egg noodle or something like that. The idea is that all of these recipes can be flexible, kind of based on our needs and what we're kind of looking to include in our diet. So I chose thin spaghetti noodles. We're going to do about a handful of these. So maybe like a quarter to a third of the box. And we're going to break them in half. So they're a little thinner. I'm just going to set these to the side. We'll add these in a bit. Put them in with my chickpeas. I'm going to let that saute for a little minute, a couple minutes longer, and then we'll add our broth in. Now I typically get, like, I like to get the concentrated jars of broth, with the low sodium vegetable ones, really nice. It's not actually broth, it's like the base, the concentrate, because it just lasts for a long time. But this, they didn't have that, so I got just a regular low sodium vegetable broth. And a way to reduce the sodium in a soup is to take a portion of the broth and replace it with water. So we're taking, instead of doing like 5 cups of broth, we're going to do 3 cups of broth and 2 cups of water. And then that'll be a nice compromise and lower that total sodium a little bit. Now, you don't have to get crazy about lowering the sodium if you want it to have, if you don't have an issue with high blood pressure and you want a little more sodium, by all means, boost it up in however way you want. But I just decided to kind of keep it a little lower. Because as you know, soups can be very high in sodium. All right, great. So that's going to be going. I'm actually going to put the broth in now, just because it's a little louder and it'll cook with the broth in it. So let's do the 2 ounces. I'm sorry, we're going to do 3 cups. I want those veggies to come to a boil and cook a little bit longer before I add the chickpeas and the noodles. The chickpeas don't really need long at all in there. And the noodles, same type of a story. Bump it up a little bit. Great. We're just gonna let that go. And then let's get our slides open. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. All right. Great. So why would we reset this time of year? So again, like we might have had a busy schedule, maybe travel. Maybe we're skipping meals, sometimes with summer, people are running around, doing different things outside, and we're not on the same schedule that we normally are. And maybe some people aren't meeting exercise goals. So I know a lot of the people I work with that like to work out outside, like this summer was just really hard for them, right? It was so hot, just was like so humid, right? Even by the end of it, I was like, I'm done. I like really like the warm weather, but I think as I get older, it gets tiresome after a while. And I think, kind of like a reset. I feel like this is a more reset type of time of year for a lot of people than like the new year is, just because it feels good outside. Like, it kind of is more motivating to people. So one thing we want to do is to try to find balance, right? So let's be thinking about how we're going to build some exercise into our day. And I honestly feel like that's really hard for a lot of people, including myself. Where is it going to fit in? We always have other things that need to get done, and just really trying to find ways to kind of build that in. So we like to think of exercise in like a couple categories, right? So we have like our cardio. So we're maybe doing like some moderate cardiovascular exercise. When we're doing that moderate exercise, we can typically talk, but we can't sing. There's obviously apps and things that can check our heart rate too. But that's just kind of a quick way to think about it. Okay, if I'm walking and that's where I'm at, I'm probably in that moderate range. And then we also have like weight strengthening. So that's something that if we're able to do that, to build that in a few days a week. And then we also have these like just our daily things. So like our daily movement, be it like the walking we do at our jobs, or going up the steps to get the laundry, or like fidgeting, or getting up and moving around. All of those things kind of count too towards that bigger picture of our, movement throughout the day. Prioritizing sleep. So that's something that I know we've touched on before, but really trying to focus in on that, building those good habits around sleep, the unwinding before bed, putting the screens away, um, trying to, figure out what's disrupting our sleep, trying to kind of get things kind of taken care of that are messing with our sleep, and really trying to put a focus on that. Maybe it's like an earlier bedtime, or something, which I find this time of year tends to get a little easier for people if they want to try for an earlier bedtime, just because it starts getting dark earlier. And then focusing on a balanced plate. So this is my plate. My plate's actually a really nice website, myplate.gov. But it shows, this is what replaced the food guide pyramid. But it just kind of shows how to kind of like break apart a plate in terms of, balancing it. So we're staying satisfied, we're hitting our nutrient goals, we're getting enough fiber, enough protein, and all of that. A lot of organizations have put out plates kind of after this. And they kind of mostly, pretty much all of them have like half of the plate fruits and, vegetables, of some typically like heavier on the vegetables. And then building in some daily rituals, right? So that can kind of help us reset. So some things that we kind of do consistently every day. So maybe we have a morning routine, maybe we stretch or meditate or pray, make our beds, whatever we do. That ritual can be important for us. Movement, mindful meals. Um, and then kind of like a winding down before bed. Maybe we have a cup of chamomile tea or sleepy time tea, relax, maybe read a paper book. I always feel like paper books are, you know, nothing puts me to sleep faster than trying to read a paper book when I'm tired. And then tracking. So, we've touched on this a little bit before, But that can really help us with weight related goals. So if we want to gain or lose weight, doing some tracking can really help. This Nutritionix app is my favorite one for tracking. It's free. It does the recipes. You can scan labels. You can talk into it. So this is kind of a nice one to build in. And I know I've had this slide, I think maybe on my January talk, but I know I have new people on here, so I like to point it out again. But the other thing it can do is kind of see where we're at with those micronutrients, where we're at with our fiber intakes. So I always kind of like tell clients, I'm like, it's kind of like, we're in this country, we're set up to like overeat and overspend, right? So having like a money budget helps us to kind of like keep things at bay, and having kind of like a food budget or like tracking the food helps us, to kind of keep things where we want them. So, and it's not something we have to do all the time, but kind of like that, once we kind of get into it and kind of see what things have in them, like how many calories, how much protein, we kind of get into a routine with it. And then we can, maybe just check in with it as needed. So maybe we get comfortable and then we're kind of just checking in every couple of weeks, maybe we put a day or two in. The other thing we could do is just use an app or a note. We could just use a notebook, like a paper journal. So that works as well. It's that kind of accountability piece. So we know we have to write it down. Sometimes we're less likely to eat it. And then we could track other things in the food journal. Especially if it's a paper, we're going to have unlimited space for what we're going to put in there. If we want to track our bowel movements, our water intake, blood glucose, if we have diabetes, weight, exercise, all that sort of thing. A lot of the apps you can also put in your exercise, put in your weight, and like Nutritionix, there's an area to write notes in. And then I think I've shown you guys this one too, but for those of you that are new, I do like this app by Dr. Greger. And it's kind of just like a nice positive thing. So there's 24 options that you can kind of check off what you do every day. So like you can kind of see here, there's a little bean category, there's berries, cruciferous vegetables, greens, and there's always a little info box next to it that kind of you can open it and it explains like what's a serving, what actually counts as a cruciferous vegetable. So this is a nice kind of positive thing, and then it tracks your progress over time. And then when we're doing like these, thinking about reset, we could do some resets on our pantry, on our freezers. So for pantries, we might want to stock up on some beans, some lentils, some whole grains, maybe some canned veggies, some canned fruits, just things that are easy to have on hand so that we feel like we have ingredients to make a meal if we want. Like if we don't have a plan for that day, we still have something we could pull from. And then also like maybe some easy to grab, satisfying snacks. So I find that, if you're going through treatment, especially like going in and out of doctor's appointments, maybe in the infusion suite, you're going to want kind of easy things to take with you to be able to eat during those long days. And then, so some of those things might be like roasted beans, nuts, seeds, popcorn can be nice. Different like dried fruits, all sorts of like different bars if you like different types of bars. But just having some kind of easy things on hand is really helpful. And then for our freezers, we might stock up on some veggies, some fruits, frozen beans. Actually, you can find certain places. So, I mean, edamame is going to be your easiest to find, but there's other kind of frozen bean mixes that you can find. And then sometimes whole grains too. Like sometimes you can find a whole grain frozen depending on where you're at. And then if we're looking for something sweet, I like these little frozen strawberries that have a little chocolate tipped on them. So I get these at Aldi, and there's a more expensive brand that you can get other places. Um, but I find it's nice and easy just to, it takes a while to eat them. So you're not going to like overdo it. It's not like trying to eat like Hershey Kisses and you're just able to pop like a dozen into your mouth. This takes a little work. So we tend to eat a little less, but a nice option if we're looking for something a little sweet in the freezer. I think I might actually, I'm going to move this to the oven because or to my stove top because it's not coming to a boil yet, and I do want to be able to add everything else to it. So let me do that real quick. I might just take a peek in the oven real quick as well. All right, I think that might be done quick in the oven, probably in like 10 minutes. And then mindfulness. So I think it's really good practice to start working on kind of paying attention to those hunger cues, right? And I know I've touched on this before, but it's always good to have a refresher. When we're feeling like we want to eat something and it's outside of our meal time, um, you know, meal times, we want people to eat, want you to be hungry, all of that. But outside of meal times, like after dinner is usually a tough one for people. If you're feeling like you want to eat something, like close your eyes, take like 3 deep breaths, and then you're going to assess where in your body you're feeling that hunger. Is it in your stomach? Is it growling? Are you actually feeling those hunger cues? Or is it from the neck up? And the neck up is like, we want something sweet, we want something salty, crunchy, whatever. If it's from the neck up, we need to have some tools in our toolbox to kind of combat that, right? So we could have a cup of herbal tea. So a cup of hot tea. By the time we heat the water, steep the tea bag, let it sit, sip on it. That's usually like 20 to 30 minutes. It can be a nice part of our unwinding routine and kind of serve the purpose of like filling that space that we might normally be snacking in. We also, some people will also brush their teeth after they're done eating, and that signals food's over now. Or they might have a piece of hard candy, or they might just find that they go to a different part, of the house or something out of the kitchen, whatever. Um, and once they're in that routine of not eating at night, it gets a lot easier to not eat at night. And then slowing down when we're eating. So kind of like taking our time, making sure we're sitting down, not standing up trying to eat real quick, ditching the screen. So that can be helpful. So kind of like when we're eating, like let's try not to eat like in front of the television or in front of our phones. We're more likely to kind of have more than we need if we're doing that. There's a whole lot of other things too, like um, you know, there's some research that shows like kind of like moving the plate away from you a little bit, like especially if you're like out to eat, can kind of slow you down and like, maybe kind of have people kind of stop eating a little earlier. Sometimes if people are out kind of packing up half of their meal and, you know, with the intention of bringing it home can slow us down and have us eat a little bit less. We're constantly just trying to work with these minds that we have, right? um, and then nourishing soups and stews. So we talked about one today. What I love about them again is that they can check a lot of boxes. So a lot of things that we're working on, soups and stews can really be useful for. So we can, if we're trying to add greens into our diet, that's a great way to throw some greens in. If we're trying to add beans or lentils, great way for that. Maybe we want some cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. Those all go great in soups and stews. The other thing is that they're warm and satisfying. They're easy to digest. So, people are feeling nausea or having different issues related to treatments. Soups can be great, great option for people. Um, I've worked with people of like, if soups are one of the few things they can tolerate, once you have your bowl of soup, just mix a couple teaspoons of olive oil in with it to kind of boost the calories if you're needing a little bit more calories, and that can work really well for people. One pot meals, right, can be less stress, more nutrients, less cleanup, which is always important. And then also a great way to batch cook and meal prep. I have some people that I work with that tell me about these, like, I think they're called super cubes. I don't know if any of you have used those or have them, but they're like a silicone tray of just like um four or two or four kind of cup size cubes. And that's how they freeze their soups. So they put their soups in these little freezer cubes and then they'll pop them out and keep them in a bag or a Tupperware or whatever. And then that's easy to grab because it's kind of pre-portioned into a 1 cup serving. We can focus on kind of getting some protein in our soups and stews, again, through those beans and lentils, but then also, through some animal protein, chicken, turkey, fish. We can also cook an egg into our soup, almost like egg drop soup, but just making sure it's cooked all the way through. We don't want to put that in while it's boiling and kind of make sure that it's, fully hardened. Vitamins and minerals, can be found in our soups and stews between those greens, mushrooms, our carrots, onions, squash, and then fiber-rich starches, right? So we talked about using this thin brown, thin whole wheat pasta, but we could also use barley, which I love in soups, brown rice, wild rice, quinoa, really good opportunities to incorporate in some of those fiber-rich starches. So for an action plan, we can choose one reset habit to start this week if you'd like. Write it down, share it with friends or family, track your progress. So that can always be fun. So we might decide we're going to exercise and do maybe one walk a week for like 15 minutes outside or even in front of the TV. I don't know if anybody's done the Leslie Sanson. Has anybody heard of her before? She's been recording walking videos for decades, but she has a really nice free YouTube channel. And so it's Leslie Sanson, Sansone. But she has like a 1 mile walk, a 2 mile walk, fun music, kind of is like, reminds you a little bit of like a Richard Simmons type of flow, but it's all like walking and some of it's more modern, which is can be nice. But yeah, her stuff is great. It's all like free on YouTube. So if people if people feel like they need more breaks when they're walking, then maybe what outside, would allow for doing that and just having a chair nearby, pausing it, taking a break, getting back into it, I think is a great way to start kind of building endurance and building that physical activity in. And then some recipes. So we always have our cancer support community website. Old Ways is the Mediterranean diet website. And then the AICR.org. I'm going to grab our stew and bring it back over here. I mean, our soup. Definitely got nice boiling over there. Great. And I'm just going to pop in our chickpeas. Stir that up. And then we're going to start letting these noodles cook. Now, some people, when they're making soup with noodles, they'll make the noodles separately and then like serve the soup over the noodles because it does absorb, most of the liquid that you have in here. But it's all dependent on how fast you're going to eat it, what you want to do with it. All right, so there's that. I'm going to see if our pumpkin bars are done so we can take a peek at those real quick. So just a tiny bit longer, you see a little bit of that still on my fork, just like a pumpkin pie if you're making it. Since there's an egg in there, we do want it to be cooked all the way, but that's roughly what it looks like. Really looks like the picture. I'm gonna pop it in for a little longer. Let I make sure it's done all the way. All right. Does anybody have any questions?